We talked just before we started the interview about the fact that you were up till after o'clock in the morning doing a interview, or a talk. Can you give us a background? Because I was really intrigued by the project, and it shows that. I mean, when I introduced you as all sorts of things. You know, author, blogger, interviewer, all of that stuff. What I didn't say at the time was, you know, I also see you as sort of a conservationist, and this I think is a really good example of David Lindo, the conservationist. So could you give us a background to that project and tell us what you're trying to achieve there?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I mean, my mission in life is to try and engage people in urban areas with nature and birds through the medium of birds, and that's my whole thing, and that's what I set myself up to do. So with Cleveland, I was invited over by the Western Cuyahoga Audubon Society, and Cuyahoga is the name of the river that runs through Cleveland. I was invited over there to basically, I mean, initially to just go on bird walks with them and talk to them about urban birding. So I went over and I was so heartened. I didn't know what to expect. I'd never been to Ohio before, and my journey there was quite sort of traumatic because it was snowing and freezing. I had to sort of fly from Chicago to Pittsburgh and then pick up a car in the middle of the night and drive, you know, another 4 hours through terrain I'd never seen before in my life, and past massive trucks to get to this place where I was staying again on my own. So it was like, oh. But when I met with the people, they were so lovely. I mean, I automatically felt as if I was in a family. I was invited into a family. And the whole idea developed into a situation where I was trying to get them to organize these walks around Cleveland, and in particular around the more deprived areas, get the local people from these more deprived areas, who are invariably Afro-American, to explore their neighborhoods, ostensibly to find out about urban birds, but in reality, just to see their neighborhoods in a different way, and to actually hopefully fall in love with the environment and hopefully kind of protect areas that, you know, could be worth protecting to encourage wildlife. And it was quite an interesting experience because, you know, I spent time with the birders who were part of the WCAS, but also during the afternoons I'd go and visit schools where, you know, that were predominantly Afro-American, and it was really distressing in a way because a lot of these kids, you know, they came from single parent homes. Sometimes the parent was, you know, on drugs and what have you. The way they had their meals was just at school because there was no food at home. And to try and encourage these people, I thought, how can I do that in 1 hour? You know, and luckily some of the schools I went to, they had programs where the teachers were trying to engage with the kids and with some success actually. So anyway, since leaving Cleveland, they've actually taken up this idea with aplomb. They've really gone for it. And I was meant to go back, actually, I was meant to be there now to sort of see how things are going, but they've got one walk set up already, which has been running now for the last few months. And the idea was I was going to go back and teach, set up a sort of a teaching program to teach people to lead these walks. And there's an idea that I will then wanted to sort of then roll out across Ohio and then maybe the rest of the states thereafter. So that's what's interesting to me. That's for me the next sort of phase of my existence really, is to try and see if I can set up these kind of scenarios where people can really get connected to nature, but within to start off with the comfortable zone of their local area, because a lot of these people are afraid of leaving their local area and even more afraid of getting into the countryside. They are petrified. You know, I spoke to some of these kids because one of the teachers has set up this group across a couple of years in school, and he calls the group the Bird Nerds. And these kids are so great at identifying, especially American warblers. He does a slideshow and they pick out all these species, even in really weird plumages. So they really study their thing. But when you go out with them and ask them individually, do you take your friends out or do you go out on your own? And the answer is normally, no, I'm too afraid. Afraid of what? I might be killed by a deer. What do you mean killed by a deer? Oh, my brother told me that deer are dangerous. And I said, well, do you not think dogs are dangerous? No, they're fine. But do you not realise that dogs kill 15 million times more people, or whatever, than a deer ever would? Oh, I didn't think of that. But even so, so it's entrenched in them, and that's the problem. And I'm sorry to change the subject, but this really is important to me, because when you deal with urban people, when you actually try and encourage urban people, these are one of the barriers you come across. People in the UK, for example, talk about racism as a barrier to getting people involved in nature. I don't believe that for 1 second, to be honest. I've been birding all my life. I was birding during a time when there was a lot of racism, in your face. Now it's a bit more insidious in the UK, but certainly at the time, in your face. Never got anything, well, maybe only once in my life, from birders or people involved in that community. Never. And what I'm seeing now is that people are being fed all these things like, oh, if you go in the countryside, you're going to get ostracized, you're going to get racially abused. So these people think, in that case, I'm not going. And I think that's so terrible to feed people that information, because that is so wrong.
Yeah.
It's about getting people to get out there and enjoy it and realize that actually it's fine. So that's what I realized when I went to Cleveland. So that whole experience, stuck with me, and I'm really happy that I'm involved with this group, the WCAS. They've actually asked me to become their global ambassador the other night, which is really nice. But I think it's really, because in America, even though people go urban birding, up until recently, people didn't actually realise it was urban birding. So you can't tell them about urban birding. Oh, really? That sounds amazing. But you're doing it anyway. Oh, so, because I'm not, I call myself the urban birder, but I'm not the urban birder. We all are urban birders. All I'm doing is trying to get people to realise that, if I have to use a phrase to make you kind of feel friendly towards it, then okay, urban birding. But in reality, I'm trying to get you to acknowledge the nature around you, to care and love your environment, and eventually become some kind of conservationist, even if it just means that every now and again you dip into your pocket to give some money, or you sign a petition. That's enough.
Yeah, and you touched on it, and I'd like to investigate a bit further. This sort of, there's a lot talked about around diversity in bird watching, or in nature itself. So I'd like to hear your views on that. I believe this week is Black Birders Week in America. Let's first of all talk about, why is it that, you did mention that sort of, there's sort of the peers tell him it's dangerous or you shouldn't be doing it. But why do you think it is? Why do you think that birding and wildlife in general, there's not that many ethnics that actually do get involved in it?
Okay, I think in Britain, I think the main reasons, I think in the past it was fear, and I think that fear is still around now, but it's taken on different shape. But I think one of the main reasons, well, there's three reasons as far as I can see. There's the socio-demographic reason, the fact that you live in the middle of the city. It doesn't matter what colour you are, you live in the middle of the city, you may be working class, and you just don't think about nature. You just think, the other day I did a podcast for the BBC with an artist, a musician, and she had recorded some sounds in her music that came from the natural world, and she did it because of lockdown. But then when she was speaking, it was clear that she just had no perception of nature. She just said, "Oh, nature's out in the middle of the countryside."
Yeah.
So she, so that's one of the issues. People they come from these certain areas of life in certain parts of urban areas, and nature is not mentioned because no one thinks that there's any nature there. It hasn't been shown to them yet. So that's one issue. I think another issue is, as I said earlier, peer group pressure. People saying, "What are you doing watching birds?" I mean, when I started watching birds actively, as 7 or 8, 9-year-old, I was chastised, mostly by black kids actually. The black kids saying to me, why are you doing that? That's English," as they said this in their false patois accents. And I say, well, hang on a minute. I was born in the same country as you, i.e. London. So what's wrong with this? So they saw it as being something that I shouldn't be doing. I should be more interested in, playing football or basketball or something. So there's a lot of stereotypes surrounding people in nature. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of these stereotypes are perpetrated by the media. You pick up a newspaper, you watch TV, invariably they're talking about things in the countryside. And if it's anything in the city, it's like it's by accident or it's some kind of anomaly. And the other thing is you turn on the TV and invariably it's a white, middle-class, middle-aged presenter talking about nature. It always galled me looking at programs about wildlife in Africa, and there's this white guy presenting with a lot of black guys carrying cases and stuff. And I'm thinking, this feels very, it feels very much like the imperialistic past. So I think a lot of people of colour, a lot of ethnically diverse people, I hate that phrase BAME, by the way. I hate it with a passion. I don't actually identify with it. I think it's I think it's a very diversive, very kind of, it's this horrible word, acronym, should I say. Anyway, I think a lot of people are put off by that. They think, well, that's not for me, because they don't see anyone that they recognise. And I think people like the BBC should be doing a hell of a lot more to rectify that. And it's not that hard, I don't think, personally. But unfortunately, these people sit in their little rooms, they make their decisions, don't really talk to anyone, and then that's that. In my 15 years, for example, of being a young birder, I've very rarely been sort of asked to actually comment on these things or asked to go to a meeting. And in the times that I have been asked by NGOs, for example, to talk about the lack of ethnic diversity, again, most of the time it's just lip service. They come in, we talk, and then nothing's done. And that may make you feel that some of these NGOs are sort of institutionally racist. I don't know. I think it's more a case of, that may be the case, as with a lot of things in life. But I think also the main thing is that these people just don't know what to do. They scratch their heads. And instead of doing the obvious, like getting people together, like talking to me and talking to other people and just getting opinions and getting people to work together, they just think they can work it out themselves. And it doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. For me, the answer is, it's not an easy answer, but the answer is simple in many ways, and that is to make it appealing to the very target audience you're talking to. And I think that's where urban birding comes in, because, okay, we know now that a lot of people are afraid of going out into the countryside because they feel scared, out of their comfort zone. Okay, well, let's do it where you are then. Simple as that.
Yeah, mentioning NGOs, do you think that, because it's very easy to paint that picture, that it's institutional racism, but then there could be other reasons. They could just be blind to the facts or ignorant to the facts, or not, I don't know whether the word is not caring, but just basically, it's the same with a lot of things. If it doesn't impact you on your life, if it doesn't affect you, you sort of seem to just like not even think about it. So what do you think? What do you think they're potentially, and I don't want to just concentrate on NGOs, but what do you think the reasoning is?
I think part of the reason, you look at the backgrounds of some of these people, and they come from backgrounds which don't allow them to mix with people that they want to target or should be targeting. So they don't understand how those people live. And they have this whole kind of separate way of existence. And I see that, you know, when I hang out in London, I've got a lot of friends who are like the media types in the arts, what have you. And some of them I've really connected with, you know, general people, for want of a better phrase, you know. But others are quite ghettoized in their own little sort of middle class worlds, and they're not, so don't really understand. And they see people, you know, like me as being, you know, cool, or, you know, the view is still quite stereotypical. You know, they kind of see you as a cool person, as opposed to understanding what your, you know, your background means. So therefore, they don't really understand how to address that group of people. And the only way to understand that is to actually be amongst those people and to talk to them. And, you know, I've seen a lot of NGOs, and I've seen how they talk to them sometimes, these groups of people, and they speak, they're not really aware of how they speak to these people. So, I mean, I watched a film, like a promotional film by an NGO, and they were talking to the Muslim audience about going to the, you know, going to the nature reserves. But they were speaking, I mean, I think it takes a special kind of skill, because the person speaking was talking about birds, but wasn't making it that accessible as far as I was concerned. They were still talking about sort of very specific things, and not really understanding, but you need to speak in a slightly different way, different language, you know. I mean, in my instance, when I talk to people, you know, as much as I know a lot about birds and what have you, you have to kind of almost play it down a bit and get to the sort of, not, I don't want to use the word level, because it implies, like, you know, it's higher and lower or whatever, but get to their kind of sphere of thinking, so that they can then understand you. And it kind of, I've noticed with urban people generally, there is this thing where people still think that you have to be some kind of expert to be interested in nature. And because they don't know anything, therefore there's no point. And I think that has to be addressed by the way we as experts talk to them about what we're passionate about, to then try and get them involved. And I think that sometimes you may need to use language which isn't specifically scientific, but language that they can understand. I mean, I watch a lot of things on TV. The BBC, for example, they always tend to use people who have degrees or doctors and what have you, which is great. But some of these people don't know how to communicate to the man and woman on the street, because the language they use is still a little bit sort of complex in terms of the scientific angle of it. And I think that really, you really need to think about how and what you are saying to people. You really need to get them on your side. You need to be in front of them, and not even necessarily talking about birds or wildlife at first, but just get to know them before you can then say, right, you know, I'm really interested in showing you my world. You know, would you like to come and let me, you know, let's go outside and let me show you some stuff. I think you need to address it that way, and I think you need to understand straight away that, you know, that is the issue really. It's about them understanding. It's about them overcoming their pre-programmed fears, which don't exist. I mean, I do these interviews in conservation with, as you know, and I was speaking to someone, and one of the audience members raised the question, and she talked about, you know, she's black, and she was taking a group of Asian kids to Leeds or somewhere like that to go to a national park or something, and the kids were all saying, "Oh, I don't really want to go. Why is that? Oh, you know, we're going to get racially abused." And I said, I asked the woman, I said, did you take the kids there? And she said, yeah, yeah. And I said, did they get racially abused? And she said, no. So, you know, it's overcoming these fears. And I think, again, it's the fact that they're not seeing people like themselves. There's no role models, really, very few. And the people that are talking about this sort of stuff are not, or talking about wildlife and what have you, are not able or seemingly able to actually appeal to these people because they come from a certain background. It's like, I love Chris Packham. I think he's brilliant. But he did that walk for wildlife a couple of years ago, which I thought was a really nice idea. But then when I looked at the walk, I mean, it was predominantly the classic type of person you'd expect to be interested in conservation. And they were roving in the crowd, getting sound bites from people to put on social media to sort of exemplify what's happening. And for me, I felt that they were just talking to the classic people you expect. I would make a point of going to people that you wouldn't expect. Because there was a couple of black people in the crowd I saw, never spoken to. There's a few women there, never spoken to. There were people that should have been spoken to, that would appeal to other people, because then those people are the people that they'd recognise those people as looking like them. Do you understand? Instead, they were talking to people that you just classically thought would be interested in nature. So therefore, it's not going any further. You're just talking to the same people the whole time. And I think, it's all about reaching out to new people. That's what it's got to be about. And as I said before, those new people are predominantly in urban areas. So you need to get into those areas and you need to talk to them.
Lots of interesting stuff you said there. First thing I want to pick you up on and ask you about is the teacher that said that the kids had said that they didn't want to go to a park because they would be racially abused. Where do you think that came from? Because that strikes me as being there is and clearly, we're talking here about sunbirding, and the problem is much bigger than that. But that seems to me to be something that's come from either peers or a family. Where would something like that come from? Where would they think by going to a park they're going to be racially abused?
I think you answered it. I think it's from peers and family, and also from what they are told sometimes. I mean, again, I go back to what I've seen online when people have been actually actively saying that, ethnic minority people are barred, using the word barred, or have barriers to get into nature because of racism. And I think, well, where's that? Ask that question back in the 80s and 70s when there really was racism in a big way. Then I can say, okay, there's a fair enough. But then I used to go all over the place. I mean, I went to Scotland when I was 13, middle of the Cairngorms, middle of the Western Highlands, the only black guy for hundreds of miles probably. I didn't get any racism. I can understand why people may feel it or think it, because you can go some places, like I go to Europe, to Eastern Europe even, and I walk around the streets with binoculars on and you looked at, and you may think, oh my God, that's racism. But in reality, it's actually curiosity. They're just looking at you because you're different. And I think it's all about this being in comfort zones. Some ethnically minority people in the ethnic minorities are in their comfort zones. So when they go outside of that comfort zone, they feel very exposed. And I look in my family. I've got my sister who's younger than me, and she used to sort of shun the idea of going out to the countryside. Why am I going there? I'm hanging out with my mates in the city. That's where it's at. And then she went to a wedding in Scotland, in the middle of Scotland, and I expected her to be really kind of, moaning about it. And she absolutely loved it. She's walking along the rivers, and getting really soaked into the atmosphere, and she craves it now. And that's because she was introduced to it, because she had these preconceived ideas. But then when you actually get there, you realise, actually, it's fine. And you're more likely to be racially abused, if that's what people are worried about, in a city than you are in the middle of the countryside. So that's where the messaging is really getting confusing. And that's why it's so important that we, have some kind of program or some stuff that's put out there, but from a big platform that a lot of people can see at the same time. That will help the situation no end. It's all very well sitting in little rooms and discussing things, but you need to get out there and talk to people.
Yeah. And speaking of talking to people, going back to you mentioned the word comfort zone, and we started off talking about NGOs, and this is not because we're picking on NGOs, it just, you know, and we're just generalizing to make points. Do you think that it is either a fear or a lack of understanding of racism that is making people almost shy away from approaching Black people, Asian people, Muslims? And to put that, just to make sure that the question's right, if you've got a NGO that is predominantly white, or if you've got, let's concentrate on a bird club for a second. If you've got a bird club or a wildlife club, predominantly white, and I would say probably 80 to 90% people that are knocking on heaven's door, quite old people. So go back a long way. Not that I want to be ageist, but it's unfortunate. That's another issue, getting young people into the wildlife clubs. But do you think that it might be a fear because either they think, well, I might say something wrong because this is a Black person, or I don't want. Do you think that that plays a part?
I think it does. I think people are genuinely nervous, especially when there's people saying, you know, whatever you said is racist. I remember seeing stuff online when a woman was saying something which I thought was fairly reasonable, and the person she was speaking to then turned around and said, "You're a racist, and you're white, privileged, middle class, all that sort of stuff." And I remember writing to that woman privately and saying, "Listen, you know, the person that said that to you, please, I'm writing on that person's behalf to apologise, because I can see from what you're saying that you're really trying to make a difference. But now you're doubting yourself because what you're doing is still being deemed by this person as being racist. So then you're confused, thinking, well, what can I do? Maybe I am racist." And that's so dangerous. That's why we have to be so careful when it comes to calling people racists and what have you. I think we have to be very, I mean, obviously there's some cases which is black and white, but other times, you know, you just have to be careful because people sometimes may not necessarily mean to be racist because of the way they've been brought up. They might use a phrase or say, I mean, I've had times when I've been out birding and someone says, "Oh, I can," you know, in the dark, "Oh, I can see your, I can only see because when you smiled, I saw your teeth." Well, I thought, but I know that person isn't racist. They're just trying to be funny. You know, I've had it in Spain actually. I've been out birding, and not actually birders, but general people. I mean, I might be at a cafe or something. I'll speak to people, and they say, "Oh, you've caught the sun more than I have." You know, things like that. They don't mean to be racist. I think they're just trying to be funny, and it's ignorant.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes you have to kind of correct them, but in a polite way, so that they learn from it, and they can then maybe be a bit more sensitive in the future. So I think a lot of it's down to understanding and realizing that, you know, you've got to be kind of careful, especially in this day and age where people are even more sensitive to things like that. You just got to be a bit more considerate and think about what you're saying. And that works both ways, by the way. It's not just, again, you know, whites against anyone else. It's all of us. We have to be very, you know, thoughtful. I mean, sometimes you can say things to people when you know them, you can just make a joke or have you. But when you don't know people and when you're trying to get them involved in something, you need to not to be oversensitive in terms of being too PC, but you need to just, you know, bear in mind how you speak to people, what language you use. So it is a massive education, I think. I think, you know, we have to wake up now to this whole idea that if we're going to get new people involved, regardless of colour or creed or whatever, we need to think about how we approach people. And I find, and I will say this, I find a lot of the NGOs very conservative, very not very creative at all in terms of their thinking. And, you know, I'm seeing a lot of young conservationists coming through, which is great, but none of them are being encouraged to be mavericks. Where's the next Chris Packham? I can't see that person coming through. And on top of that, you know, these organisations are churning out mini images of themselves, which I don't think is a great thing. You know, I think that we need really to instill this whole idea that you need to. I mean, these people have been taught about conservation, but they're not taught about things like how to speak in public, how to express ideas. I mean, I think the whole nature kind of sector is quite far behind other sectors. We still think of nature being nature. This is nature. Whereas the way I look at it is that nature encompasses arts, music, everything. It's all the same thing. And once you understand that it's all intertwined, it's not separate, we're all part of nature. All the stuff that we do is influenced by nature. Once we understand that, then we'll have a much better chance of then talking to other people to get them engaged, because we understand that they like music, they like sport. Then we can bring that with the nature and get it into a package that they can understand and get involved with. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I can see it. I can see it. I can understand where you're coming from. I just can't see the people that make the decisions seeing it, if you know what I mean, because they do have a budget for this and a budget for that, and so the governments, you know, that's the difficulty. You know, it's you look at what's just happened with this pandemic and the lockdown and all the rest of it, and you think you're right the way through it. I've been hearing people saying things like, "Oh, yeah, things are going to change, and people are taking more notice of wildlife and in the gardens and all of this lot." And then within days of Boris making decision, whatever the decision was supposed to be, that you can go out, the beaches get packed with people, and then they leave all the litter, and then they go home, and you just think, well, we've just reverted to type. Nothing has changed. You know, we've just gone back to normal. I think that to me is sad.
It is sad, but I also think that not enough may have been done at the time to actually kind of encourage it. So I think, for example, you know, I know the TV companies were struggling for ideas to produce programming in view of the coronavirus lockdown and social distancing. But I think that there could have been programs done about the urban wildlife that people are seeing around each other, you know, around their areas, to get people to think about it more. Because even though I was talking to a lot of media, radio stations and what have you about the fact there's more birds, we can hear more birds. Why is that? It's often just a "and finally" moment, or oh, by the way, we're bored, but you can hear birds. You know, there needed to be more done to try and hook people in, because, as you say, Alan, you know, humanity, we have a track record, and our track record is that we have very short memories. You know, as you say, we revert back to form straight afterwards. So that was an opportunity missed I think, by some people to actually get engaged. But I think, you know, in the long run, I think my thoughts haven't changed. I think in the long term, we need to be engaging more people, particularly in urban areas. We need to be more creative in how we do it. We need to come to them as opposed to expecting them to come to, you know, nature reserves in the middle of nowhere. And for me, it's more than the racial issues. It's actually an urban issue. And, you know, 81% of our population in Britain live in cities. So there's a lot of people to be speaking to. A lot of people. It's a lot of work to be done. And I think we need to change. I mean, there's some organisations, I think, some of the wildlife trusts that are in urban areas have done a really great job. I mean, one I will point to, there's two I'd point to straight away, the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and the London Wildlife Trust. For me, have done a lot to try and bridge that gap. I mean, you look at their messaging, you look at their sort of stuff they send out, and there's pictures featuring people of all creeds working together to create nature reserves. And that's so important to do. It doesn't look staged because it's actually real. The people are actually there doing it. And it's stuff like that that makes you, you know, it's all about going back to the whole thing about making it cool, making it interesting. And I think, you know, if you're selling the idea, like I'm selling the idea of conservation, essentially, you have to be popularist in many ways. You have to be able to appeal to a wide group of people. You have to make them feel as if they can be involved. You've got to make them want to be involved. You've got to excite them and not blind them and baffle them. Yeah. So basically, it's about looking at your audience and looking at them differently and trying to contextualize them in the 21st century and in 2020, as opposed to what they may have been like in the past. I know it's a bit hard in terms of how I'm saying this, but you need to basically talk to people as they are now, to appeal to people using the things that they have now. So in other words, people always complain about kids using mobile phones and computers. Okay, well, bring that stuff with you. Let's make it more contemporary. That's what I'm trying to say. And also, I think, and again, the NGOs can do a lot to help in terms of trying to improve their outreach. But I also think the media need to be really educated as well. And the media, okay, some of the media you can never really educate, because I do a lot of radio programs, and less so these days, but in the past you were introduced as a twitcher, for example, because they just think of birding as twitching. So you have to then educate them in terms of the difference between those things. And then you got to educate them and talk to them, because my view is that you need to put, I mean, I see myself as an ambassador, as many of my conservationist friends, presenting friends do. You have to then put across this whole image that, in fact, you're just a normal person, you know, you can have a laugh, but you have an interest in something that is wholesome, it's good for your soul, it's good for mental health. You know, it's a great antidote to today's life and the stresses of life. And I think you have to sell it in that way to make it more approachable, make it more easy for people to get involved. And I think we need sometimes to break things down a bit more to make it much more accessible, not necessarily technical. I mean, I've been criticised in the past when people ask me, oh, you know, in terms of media, ask me, how does someone get involved in birding then? And I say, well, you don't need to read a book or anything, just open your mind and your eyes. And people say, no, you should be getting a book and reading books and stuff. And that is not the issue. The issue is getting people involved in the first place. They can move on to all that straight afterwards. You know, you have to create bridges for people to travel across comfortably. And I think a lot of this whole sort of issue of getting people involved stems from urban areas. There should be a lot more stuff about wildlife and engagement of wildlife in urban areas, because that's where most people are. You look at TV programs, I mean, as much as I like Springwatch, you look at Springwatch and most of that's all about middle of nowhere, you know. And I'm thinking to myself, my mum doesn't really know what a hare is. She's unlikely ever to go to, you know, to Stockholm or to Scotland to look at rutting red deer. But she is likely to look out of her window and see a grey squirrel even. If she saw a red squirrel, that'd be amazing. To see a grey squirrel.
Down there.
She'd be much more likely to see a grey squirrel or a great tit at a bird feeder. It would be much more interesting for her to learn about the backstories of those creatures, to get her then interested in all those things that they show generally. And I think, you know, when you look at the wildlife programming at the moment, you know, there's David Attenborough, who is the Don, and his series are amazing. But with each one, the bar gets higher and higher in terms of all the technical camera work and all that sort of stuff. And my fear is that people watch these things and think, oh my God, it's amazing. But it's an entertainment. It's not connecting them to their doorstep. And I think there needs to be a lot more done where people are, so that they can actually realize what's around them. And I think, especially in America, there's a lot of natural history programming, which is all about jaws, claws, and fangs. It can't kill you, it's not interesting. So you get kids watching this stuff in the UK and then thinking, well, there's nothing in Britain that's like that, so I'm not interested. And I think it's been sold the wrong way. You know, we need to get people, I mean, the lockdown and this whole coronavirus thing has been quite interesting, because it's enabled people to actually realize that there's some really nice things in this country. And I think I'm just hoping that people especially people that can influence, stick with this subject and get people to actually still think about it once things go back to semi-normality. I think it's so important. I think the overriding thing, Alan, is that we need to do much more where people are. We need to show people that there is nature where they are, and not make it an easy excuse to think for people to think, well, I know there's all these wildlife, when I go in the countryside, but it's a bit boring. I ain't got time. I'm just going to carry on doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I think a lot more needs to be done. And I think, the David Attenborough stuff in the world can work side by side with the more shoot from the hip stuff locally in urban areas. That can work together, because then there's a bridge. I can see this here, I can see all this amazing stuff here, but if I just cross this bridge, there's this amazing world out there as well. And both worlds actually blend, because when it comes to birds, some of the birds you see in these remote areas also show up in urban areas too. And that's something that's not really spoken about. We need to get that message across, but you don't have to go anywhere to see amazing things. Just open your window, walk out of your door, look up, and there is something, and that something has a backstory, and that backstory has traversed the globe in terms of that particular species, or that swallow that you see flying over your head in the middle of London. That swallow may have flown from southern Africa, has flown across the heads of giraffes and lions, has flown across conflicts in the continent, has flown across a massive desert, has avoided being attacked several times by various things, has flown across the Mediterranean avoiding bullets, has flown across the France and what have you, to end up, flying across your head. Where's that story? Those kind of things. So I've noticed when I talk to kids in urban areas and I tell them all those things, it's like, and even adults, and they think about things differently. Don't assume knowledge. Let's have more storytelling. Let's try and get kids and adults, their parents, engaged. And that's the other thing. Engage the kids, but also involve the family, because you can engage the kids in school. They go home to a family of parents who are not interested for whatever reason, and that interest dies there. So get everyone involved.
That sounds like a good place to leave it. For now, David, thanks ever so much. That was a really good insight into you and your urban birding, and not only did we cover the entertaining side of sort of birds and wildlife, we covered what to me is sort of really important, which is this, looking at the education element and how we can broaden both the knowledge of individuals, but also get more people out there and get more people, as you would say, looking up. I don't want to steal it, but looking up.
It's for everyone.
So it is. So yeah. So for now, David, thanks ever so much. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Allan, for having me.
Take care.
And you.
See you soon.